Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rovertime podcast number 36, Taking Back the Time Slot. I am Duffer Life, and here with me today are Lex, Mr. Sutherland, and Stan. Welcome, everyone.
What up?
Hello.
And where do we start first exactly?
And we're out. Well, I think the first. I think the first topic. And I don't know much about it, but we were talking about it. Was about the Florida gun law. Guns as I've said before, I'm never owned one, never even fired one.
Change that.
But I think, I might be. I'm actually considering buying a handgun.
Do it. Do it.
Just because I'm being told I'm the devil and I can't. Or I shouldn't. It's making me reconsider that, but yeah, it seems like they just passed some legislation in Florida, and it doesn't seem to be very popular. I don't know if someone has more of the specifics on that, but it doesn't seem to be popular with both sides of the spectrum. Frankly,
yeah, it's the reasonable gun control. Like, these are all the things that everyone said. Oh, well, if you just do these things, it'll eliminate shootings. It wouldn't have stopped the shooting at all. But
no, it wouldn't have.
It raises minimum age to get a firearm, any firearm. So it brings it in line with handguns, which is probably the one where it's going to get nailed on, because guess what? You're abridging rights of people. This is the Second Amendment violator, probably, because it's really hard to make the argument that a long gun is not classified under the Second Amendment. It creates a waiting period for Florida, which is not really an issue, I think, for most people.
How long is the waiting period?
3 daess.
Oh, that's not bad.
It's 3 days, or however long the background check takes, whichever is longer. So,
okay,
unless they start playing around hinky things where they de facto extend it by delaying background checks, which has happened but is rare, because again, you get into constitutional issues. They banned bump stocks, which is not a huge surprise in any way.
Yeah,
also nothing to do with school shooting. Right? They allowed for the arming of some school employees, which is what we were talking about. They're specifically banning actual teachers from having them, but they allow support staff and coaches and other people. And it also increasing.
You mean like a security officer who's supposed to be, who's on the scene of a potential school shooting and hid outside? You mean that kind of support staff? They'll allow them to have the guns?
Yeah.
No, I know you mean like gym teachers and that kind of a thing, but that's just I think that's kind of an odd thing.
I still couldn't believe that, because here's the thing: I grew up in Oregon, so and I went to high school after the Kip Kinkle shooting in Eugene, and so every school or every high school in the state of Oregon has a on-duty police officer. The state of Oregon was like, nope, we're not screwing around. That was the first thing. The only thing they really did in response to that. And so I went through high school with that, and he was a pretty good influence there.
Yeah. We
haven't had issues with that other than the one in Roseburg, but that was a college, so I don't know if that counts. I don't know where we're drawing the delineation between what is a school shooting and not, because I've never thought of community colleges as
well, and then the other question I have about this law. Okay. So does that mean no one under 21 can be a cop?
I guess not. I mean, I'm still confused as to what the law.
Or is it like, okay, well, they can't buy them?
Well, no, because here's the thing: handguns were already at 20 and up, so you already had police officer provisions to exclude you from that.
Okay, so that was already in there.
That's already federal law. You have to be 21 to get a handgun in the United States under federal law already. That's why this is one of those debatable points where they're going to be like, well, but, and then the militia argument's going to come up, and so this may force the Supreme Court to actually.
Well, didn't DC versus Heller say it doesn't matter if you're in a militia or not, you still have a right as a private citizen?
That's the interpretation, but it hasn't been. The court hasn't taken up any cases that allow that challenge to be made. The court has very carefully maneuvered themselves to the point where they've just kind of let a lot of these laws lie. Okay. But this is because usually they don't do this kind of thing where they outright say all guns. Because you can make the argument that a handgun is not really a military weapon, right? It has nothing to do with the state. It's a sidearm. It's definitely something nice to have.
I'm reminded of something I once read where somebody was talking about what their drill sergeant said about certain weapons for like the case of like engineers or something. It's not something that you're meant to go to the front lines with. It's meant for something to tell nasty people to fuck off so you can work or just defend yourself a little bit longer. And
that's the thing.
This one's just so alien in a lot of ways, because sitting here in Canada, like we wouldn't even be able to broach this subject because we would find it patently unthinkable, kind of thing. And it is weird to see how fast and how quickly the turnaround in bills like this being created has been, because school shootings are not prevalent in the United States, and mass shootings are even less. And statistically speaking, they've been going down. And so you have what appears to be a bill to sort of settle the talking heads on the news that were saying like, oh my God, think of the children. And it's like, yeah, oh my God, think of the children. Give a teacher a gun.
Right.
This raises the problem of what happens if the teacher isn't so much so a sane person or is having a bad day, and the student walks in and decides, okay, this is the day I'm really going to mess with the teacher. And they walk in and they go, hey, teacher, guess what? Don't come to school tomorrow. Bad things will happen. Teacher pulls out their sidearm, caps the kid right there. And it's like, oh, okay, what did we just escalate to? And I'm thinking of kids with behavioral disorders or even genetic disorders who can be extremely aggressive. And you give a teacher that, he comes around the corner, tries to give you a big hug, and suddenly he's got two in the chest. And it's like, why are you opening this Pandora's box in this way? Like, if you're going to find a sideways interpretation of this sort of thing, as I said in earlier podcasts, why not think more like a social worker security guard? So there might be one or two of them on campus, but they're an integral part of the school community. They facilitate clubs, but they have specific training, and kids can go to them with other issues, not just, oh, I might be the person to put you down. Hi, my name's Glenn.
Here's the problem in the in a lot of states in the U.S. Like I said, in Oregon, we did this where they had a permanent on-duty police officer, and he did exactly that. Because there is not a lot for an on-duty police officer to do when he is stuck on a high school campus, believe it or not. Especially if you're not in a really high crime area. It is an incredibly boring job, and he basally just walks around the school and talks to kids all day. He stays there all the way until teachers are off duty.
But old man brain. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think getting kids to not have an inherent fear of police officers is a very good thing. I mean,
it is. But here's my problem with that position, or the failing of that position. Not my problem. I thought it was a great idea, and I still do, and I support it fully everywhere. But the failing of that was that most students did not talk very openly with him because he was still a police officer, and at that time and age. Yeah, people are doing. Adolescents are testing bounds of authority.
Kids are being kids. I get that. But I also think there's something and you're seeing these people that are being so virtuous and making their rifle sawed-off shotguns. Essentially, I know it's a different weapon, but just saying, I'm sure we all saw that person running for office.
Yeah,
she cut the barrel off, which essentially is a violation of law. But then these other ones, but I think it's kind of the, back to a sign saying this is a gun-free zone is not like, oh darn, it's a gun-free zone. If there's knowing that there's an officer in there that's willing to do it, much like you see these people, they're like, well, I've turned in all my guns, and they're broadcasting on social media.
It's like a fly trap.
Well, you might as well just broadcast, hey, by the way, I'm on vacation for a week. I don't have any alarm systems and the door's unlocked. I mean, if you want to broadcast, I understand you want to make a point, but the people that you're making the point are not the people that you think you're making the point to, because
I don't think the gun-free zone actually causes any of this in any
measurable way. I don't, but I just think it's to think that having a gun-free zone sign is somehow a deterrent.
Oh no, it does absolutely nothing. But I think it's because these kids are going in with the concept of suicide, right? They get that this is the last stand. This is the moment they're making their mark, and they're trying to get some modicum of fame or meaning in their life out of this one action. So, like, it being a gun-free zone doesn't make it a better or worse target. They're expecting to die and all this. Maybe it factors that they can get a few more people killed out of it. But, like, honestly, I'm surprised we don't have more mall shootings because it seems, I mean, I guess it works out there's less traffic at malls now, so they're probably not as great at targets. But that would seem to be a much better place to do something like this, where you have fairly minimal security with no firearms, lots of people, areas that people are trapped in. And you know what? It doesn't happen a lot there because the few times that it has happened, though, you've had civilians shoot back.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. In a lot of states with the concealed carry, a mall does not have the rules that a school does, and it's you essentially it's to the thing of having police on campus, even one officer, they may be bored out of their mind, but you're immediately stopping. You're immediately made this soft target, at least a medium hard target, by knowing that there's at least. I mean, even if for something like that, if I know there's a cop in that building, there's a good chance I might not get 5 feet in 5 steps in the building. Versus, well, I know no one there has guns. I know there's no cops. I know that, so I'll be able to.
Well, here's the thing with that, Stan. So, from what I understand with what happened in Florida, they treated the position of school liaison officer as a place for dumping police officers who are no longer particularly fit for duty.
Doesn't surprise me.
But it surprises me a lot, just because in Canada, police liaison officer, they usually have to have a counseling degree on top of being a police officer. So they're expected to facilitate and be a social worker. In fact, they do things like healing circles and raising information about gangs and trying to rescue kids from bad situations. So they're empowered to be a social mediator within the school, and they don't walk around wearing their full belt and stuff like that. Sure, they have their gun, but it's not displayed. Kind of thing. So
what I would say is, I would just say it doesn't surprise me in this particular instance with that sheriff. In that county, because he has made it very clear he felt his job started and stopped with, I've hired you, I've given you a badge, I've given you a gun, and given you a handbook. That's where my responsibility ends. And so yes, I would quantify, and I agree with everything you're saying that they should be that, because a lot of it is, especially if there's an active, like a child's about to kill himself, they need to know how to talk to that child. So so I would say that revelation, especially with this particular sheriff and his staff, that's what I should say. It didn't surprise me that happened.
Minding Freedom is chiming into the chat. Sheriff Israel is an absolute coward and not fit to be a leader.
He isn't.
Well,
when he says that I didn't fail as a leader, and it's not my responsibility to know what's in a man's heart. Yes, it is. Part of your job as a leader, especially in this, is to do fitness evaluations, both mentally and physically, of your people. Okay. He clearly could not have given 2 shits about doing that, and especially when he's at the town hall, and I realize this is old news, but I haven't been here a couple weeks, knowing what had happened, but still blaming everyone else. And then in subsequent, no, I didn't think I failed. I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I step down?
So
because you're the freaking leader, jackass.
I'll devil's advocate for him for like 5 seconds, even though I pretty much agree with everything you said.
I was going to say, we have to have some conflict, and I understand that.
There's the school counselor, the school liaison position creates an interesting dilemma in that you want a security officer who knows the students and talks to them, and you also want somebody who's capable of shooting them.
Right.
These two things are kind of in conflict in training and in practice, because it is really difficult to shoot people you have an emotional relationship, or at least it should be. For the average human being that we want in this position, it should be difficult.
Well, and then on the advocate of the other side, he wouldn't have had a relationship with this guy, because this guy had been, or if he did, he would have known he was a problem, which actually it sounds like the sheriff's department did know he was a problem.
Yeah,
but I understand your point.
37 times.
It's like, hey, I've talked to this kid every day. Now he's standing in front of me with a gun.
Yeah.
So I understand that point.
That's the thing. And this is the thing. The students that are the problem in most of these scenarios, the type of student is certainly not interacting with a lot of people they should have been, or we would hope they would have. They're not interacting with teachers. They're not interacting with peers. They're not, and that's a big reason why they end up in this place, is because they don't have that social connection.
Well, the big thing, which is, I guess, pardon my French, but a mind fuck for me, is because
Canadian just swore.
Yeah,
oh my god!
Hey guys, you apologize.
We're demonetized. That's it. We're done.
The infrastructure for like getting psychological help, community resources, and stuff doesn't seem to be nearly as integrated in a lot of the places where this is cropping up. Whereas here in Canada, our RCMP, which is more akin to your FBI, is very much into providing, social welfare, being a part of things like detox centers and things like that. So they're in the community and they're expected to be community members. Whereas it seems that there isn't necessarily the same type of integration between social services and the police in some of these regions. And I'm like, why is that? Is there some sort of ideological or historical reason underpinning this?
I don't think that's a consistent thing. Colorado and Oregon have very integrated police departments. You also have to remember we don't have a federal police department or system at all. We have marshals and FBI do things very, very removed from regular police work. And that's why, like, the initial hit that, like, the FBI took, where, like, they should have known something was happening. Like, well, not really the FBI's job unless the dude's making a threat on a federal building. But they didn't relay it to the sheriff's office, even though apparently that probably wouldn't have done any good because the sheriff's office got the same notifications anyways. So
this is
even more. Yeah.
This is one of those things where, like, you have some states where, I think Florida isn't quite so good at this, but you have had states where this has happened where they are very good at it and have historically been very good at it. And it doesn't seem to be a consistent issue across the board.
So to answer your question, no idea why it's not more, other than the only thing I can think is, especially here in the States, parents are probably like, well, I don't want, someone walking around, my school, a police officer with a gun, especially nowadays, because, especially, so many people view the police as, some sort of enemy. But to answer otherwise, of course, my high school literally was across the street from the town police. So if there was a problem, the police literally, they wouldn't even have to run to their car. It'd be quicker just to run to the school. So maybe that's the kind of a thing. It's like, if you don't want them, right in the school, well, have some sort of a, satellite office within 50 yards,
Honestly, I haven't heard anyone objecting to having police in schools at this point. I haven't heard that been an actual concern in a long time.
Not since this, you know what I mean? So I don't know. It was just pure speculation. Because I don't have an answer to why it's not a thing.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Sutherland, you've been very quiet on this issue. Do you have anything to input?
I'm just trying to think of, like, what's a good way of having that kind of safety net where you can have best of both worlds, or not both, best, I guess. But, you could have that whole the cop who can talk to the kids and the cop who will shoot one if he needs to. I don't know. I'm out of my depth. I'm just over here like I'm drowning in all the smart talk. And I'm just trying to catch on.
With that, the thing which I find odd is that we don't hear more news about what's going on at the state level to try and rectify this. Why is it that it jumps to the federal level so quickly?
Because it's gun law football. And gun law. The anti-gun lobby made a very conscious choice to try to get federal laws passed. The pro-gun lobbies made a very conscious choice to focus on state legislatures, and that has created this political dichotomy that we sort of have now. And until Trump won and secured for the Republicans a lot of power, that was a working strategy, right? Everyone was so worried about Obama going and doing a gun grab, and they thought they were going to challenge the Second Amendment, and they thought maybe they had the court to do it with, and they almost did. So if Scalia's nomination or replacement had been nominated and passed beforehand, they might have had time. And if Hillary had won, or if Sanders had won, we'd be looking at a very different debate right now. We would be legitimately talking about overturning the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
And
as opposed to just Bret Stephens bitching about it in an article.
Yeah, that would be a definite, very seriously different conversation.
Man.
Instead,
playing a little devil's advocate on that, I don't even feel that during Obama, I don't even feel like it was that much of a conversation during his 8 years. It
was and it wasn't, because that they knew they couldn't win at the court. They didn't have the justices they needed, because Kennedy's never been a gun grabber. He's never argued with the intent of the Second Amendment throughout, and they needed one more justice to flip. And with Scalia, they would have had it. So that was the big thing. They probably could have gotten away with it if somebody had come in with the definite idea that they wanted to undermine the Second Amendment. They would have gotten the justice they wanted. Then they get one state law passed and challenge it all the way up through the courts, because the NRA will sue, like they are in Florida.
Yeah.
And they know they can get the test case through.
Today. Yeah,
that's the plan for, because they needed it. There's no way to undermine the Second Amendment at this point. The Republicans won too much from Reagan on, basically appointing justices that have been strong Second Amendment advocates.
Right.
And Trump continued. So.
Yeah, and my take on things is, so long as you can provide programs to make people more competent at what they do, and you can provide the data to show that the programs are working, you can implement any number of things to regulate unsafe activities and have good results or safe results. And it's so odd to my thinking that the NRA is so separate from the government, actually that it's not a government agency itself, because firearms regulation is actually the RCMP's sort of area of influence. And so it's if you actually get the police to be the ones teaching you how to use the firearms and then teaching you how to use them safely, or doing what the NRA, which is they provide those courses as well,
right,
then they are giving you the means to actually have people be in possession of what is their Second Amendment right, and to do so safely, and in doing so reduce gun crime and other stuff.
This goes back to the early 90s gun control debate and how it shaped. We ended up with may and shall issue concealed carry laws. And the dividing line there was the shall issue requires the state to hand out concealed carry permits. So there is a process, it must be adhered to, and if you qualify, you will get your concealed carry. If you have a may issue law like California did, and I think still does, and a lot of other liberal states, the county sheriff basically got to decide if you got a gun or not. That created a real issue. So no longer was it you have to go get your training. You now also had to, and there were cases and people went to jail over it. You had to make the right contributions to their re-election campaign.
Ugh.
These were scenarios that came up, and you're like, really? We literally have this amendment as a stopgap measure against corruption, and you're going to be corrupt about it? But that's the historical context for why the NRA stands against almost every law that allows any discretion in licensing for guns.
Mr. Sutherland, you're about to say something.
No, I was just going to say, in response to the whole corruption, despite this saying it's supposed to prevent corruption, life just finds a fucking way.
Okay. Now, Stan, would you like to have the last word on this topic before we move on?
No, I'm good. Thank you, though.
Okay. So
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just it's. It seems to be, it's one of these, the topic is going to go around in circles, on both sides. And I'm all for allowing people their gun rights. And, the argument seems to always, so I guess I do want the last word. The argument always seems to be, to put laws in place, but laws are already in place. They're just, people don't follow them, and that seems to always be what we're seeing with these things is there was a breakdown in the process that is already in place. So there should not really need to be a lot of needing to rewrite, rewrite the whole thing, because we just need people to fucking follow the rules.
Well, with that there, Stan, let's move on to metal things that go bang, bang, bang to blonde things. So Stormy Daniels is in the news for all sorts of reasons. Who would like to take this
one? A lot of things that go bang, bang, bang. Why didn't you just finish it? You know, you got metal things there, bang,
because
bang, bang.
And he was giving you the enjoyment of getting there yourself, Stan.
Well, it really, it wasn't
just like
that.
What Stormy Daniels does when she does her thing.
It wasn't that deep of a joke that was like, I'm not really sure where's he going with this particular pun.
Sometimes
come on, Stan.
You know, one thing I gotta say, Ralph, about Stormy Daniels that I find, and I know the principle of the problem is, the payoff. But what I also find really funny is that people think that if Trump voters found out that he had an affair with a porn star, that would have hurt him in the election somehow. Like, I'm like, do you not realize, like, these are Trump voters, okay? We knew the grab him by the pussy, and he got to bang a porn star. So you think that would make him less appealing to Trump voters who like him because they think he's already kind of, a regular guy? That's the part I find really just. I want to say the word I want to use is fascinating because it's like
for those with really it's the people with Trump derangement syndrome don't think that there was consensual sex. That's the thing. They believe this either was a prostitution scenario at best, or at worst was he did something incredibly inappropriate.
Weinstein situation.
Yeah, and he wrote a big check.
She has never even remotely alluded to it was like. In fact, she has said no.
Because she got $130,000, and they have a
non-disclosure agreement that was kind of after the fact. She didn't get $130,000 at the time of the act. Well,
we don't. That's the thing. We don't know the thing of this. And $130,000 it's not you don't leave that on a nightstand, right? You got to have there's some paperwork involved in a transaction of that size, no matter what you're doing. So there can't be the quid pro quo going on. So you got to have some things about that, right? And if it has to be a non-disclosure, well, that's worth $130,000.
It just feels like, and I got to be honest. One of the funniest things, and most when we talk about derangement, was Morning Joe saying that Trump getting North Korea to come to the table is a way to distract from the Stormy Daniels thing.
Oh my God!
I'm really? Like, how are you people in front of a camera with any sort of an audience? I was just like, this has got to be. So you're telling me that that he is willing to, in order to avoid this, he will talk with, I'm air quoting, the greatest world threat as far as, nuclear, issue right now. It's staggering to me that it's, Russia now, Stormy Daniels. It's just,
it's like what you've said before about how if he cured cancer, they would say,
oh yeah, if he cured cancer, that means he's homophobic because he didn't cure AIDS first.
They'll bitch about anything.
Yeah.
I think I hope they don't try to continue that because holy crap, it just creates the horrible optics of, well, when Clinton was accused of a sexual escapade issue that became true, he bombed aspirin factories. Trump, on the other hand, goes and has negotiations with evil people and gets them to stop doing bad things. That would be incredibly bad optics for anyone in the anti-Trump camp.
Well, I don't know if any of you watch, if anyone watches the Greg Gutfeld show. I enjoy it, and it was actually funny. They were discussing about North Korea, and they said, "How funny could you imagine if he actually gets this done, and then he conceivably wins a Nobel Peace Prize? Could you imagine the left media trying to have to come to grips with Trump getting a Nobel Peace Prize?"
Well, the prize is obviously meaningless. I mean, Obama won it without even
dude, their heads would fucking explode.
Oh my God! Just thinking, like, just the thought of it is.
Jake Tapper would just be like, bah! Or not. I
gotta give Jake Tapper some credit. He shooting stuff. Like, he was pissed at that sheriff, after when he had him on. And,
I misspoke. I was.
You could just say anyone else. Brian Stelter, Morning Joe,
Chris Cuomo.
Anyone else. But yeah,
Anderson Cooper.
There you go.
Anderson Cooper, absolutely.
Well,
oh my God.
to go.
But the Stormy Daniels thing, I mean, that's I don't know. It does, in playing it does seem to me. So really, Mr. Lawyer, you're telling me you just took $130,000 out of your pocket, gave it to her, and Trump didn't know anything? If that's what happened?
Yeah, no, I totally believe that. Actually, that sounds incredibly. Yeah, 11 days before the election. Yeah, no, I totally believe there were a ton of people who were standing around Trump. There were a ton of people standing around Trump, and a lot of them said, holy crap, he might win this, he might not, but either way, if he goes down in flames and I could have stopped it, he will nuke me.
Well, and actually, to correct, even, go back on my own just statement there, that actually is kind of what I've said, what you're saying there, Lex. I believe that a lot of things about Hillary that was the same way, plausible deniability, where the people around them took maybe took liberties that they thought was best for, her, to give her. It's like, well, I didn't know about this. And, so yeah, that's, could you imagine if this was Hillary? Like there would be no question that they would believe that she had no knowledge. I mean, hell, they act like she has no knowledge of everything as it is right now.
Oh yeah.
They act like she had no knowledge of how many millions going out for that freaking fake memo. They're like, well, she didn't. They didn't tell her about that.
So that's
Hillary didn't do nothing.
The stuff that Hillary was getting nailed on that I do legitimately believe she didn't know what was going on. The problem is that she didn't know what was going on in these instances.
Right.
So that's the failure. It's not that she screwed up, because I would totally accept that people make mistakes and they have failings, and when you own up to them, that is a sign of leadership, and you can move forward from that. When you deny it and then say, nope, that's not my responsibility, that's not really presidential, right? And usually that comes with some legal requirements to it too. That's why the laws are there. 9 times out of 10, people are let off on administrative bullshit like that. Well, but this is not a criminal action so far, unless Stormy Daniels wants to again change her story and come out and say, me too, and this is there's something illegal that happened here, which if so, great, investigate, find out what happened as best we can. But in the meantime, yeah, I think you're right. Is this going to even dent Trump's armor? Like,
no, man.
In fact, I bet you some of his base, they like him better because of it.
This is a rehash essentially. So it's like, you couldn't get it to stick in terms of, sexual misconduct or inappropriate sexual behavior when they were non-entities. So let's try and get it to stick when you have a celebrity. And as you pointed out there, Lex, it's so odd because Stormy's story seems to shift quite dramatically all the time. And you could say, well, she's trying to work around the restraining order or something like that. But the one which stuck with me the most was essentially she went into a hotel room with Donald Trump, and he was basically implying, Harvey Weinstein style, let's do something. And in her head, she went, okay, fine, let's get this over with. And that's, to me, the sad thing is it's once again evidence of a culture where the wealthy have access to people and treat sex as a commodity, which goes 4 months ago to what we were talking about with the original Me Too allegations. And it's like, well, Trump is not above doing this. And as Stan has said, it's like, to a certain part of his demographic that he does do this is something like, oh, you go Trump, you can do the things which we can't do. We can only, imagine about. And I don't know where to take it with that because it's such a non-issue. It's like we knew, or at least the people who voted for Trump knew what sort of item they were getting. And some of them might actually be more disappointed that it wasn't Mia Khalifa instead.
Oh my God. The left's head would have literally exploded if that had been the case.
Oh man!
But this is the thing. At what point? Because Weinstein definitely did something very, very untoward in a lot of scenarios, and I don't think anyone faulted him for the getting some action for being a movie executive, which I think everyone assumed already, right? That wasn't the shocking part. No. It was him debasing himself. It was him, the unwanted sexual advances. It was the women who said no, and then he continued. That was where we all kind of said, whoa, dude.
Yeah, that's where we all took a step back, like, what the fuck?
Yeah, you're a billionaire, and you are a heavyweight in Hollywood. You should have more game than this. Stop. You're embarrassing everyone involved, and you're moving into criminal areas of, crossing lines.
I'm not going to act like he's the kind of guy who should be able to walk in a room and suddenly panties are soaked, but still, it's like You've been around the block a time or two. You should know what to say.
Like, this is not a guy who has a trouble getting a trophy wife or even or a nice mistress, right? There are women out there who want that.
No. They love him for the man he is. It's not about his money.
Yeah,
they would love him for the
and I'm jolly fucking partner.
The man he is has this money, so you know.
Exactly right. But you're right. I always found that I'm like,
I don't understand.
Literally could find anyone he wanted. I mean,
but this is the difference in Trump. I don't understand the quid pro quo or the harassment or any of the untoward stuff that we would look at with Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump at the time. Donald Trump was, remember, at this exact moment in time, 11 days before the election, he was expected to be a footnote in history about a celebrity TV man who ran for president and got a nomination. He didn't win anything other than the Republican nomination.
Well, the terrible part of me is thinking, it's like, so what does Melania say to Barron? So, honey, this is the woman your dad was banging when I was pregnant with you. Don't worry, he still loves you, though.
I mean, he is not the first man to have an affair, and certainly would not be the last.
Some men are weak in their compulsions, and your dad had a moment of weakness.
As Styx puts it, he doesn't have many vices in life, and apparently women are one.
Well, I would say it's not that he had a weakness. It's he was being Donald Trump for who Donald Trump is.
Too, yeah.
And I would say, at least for now, based off of the information which we have, he doesn't seem to prey off the power politic of it, whereas Harvey Weinstein did. Clearly, he went out of his way to get the people he did because he knew he could force them to do what he wanted.
Yep.
Trump so far has talked about, really liking sexual activities and how if you are a star, people will do things with you, which they might not otherwise do. But he's never really implied or been called out on holding it over someone. Like, you will not win Miss Universe unless you sleep with me. And until we get stuff like that, this is just more water under the bridge because people knew who they were voting for.
Well, and that's the thing. And Stormy Daniels had no compulsion to do anything with him. There was no offer on the table. Nothing. She got nothing out of it other than the sex. And hey, you know what? At the time, they were roughly contemporaries and on an even keel. They were both C-level celebrities who have dabbled in politics and been kind of in that world. He had a huge run of success in it for a modicum, but again, at the time, he was looking to lose. And losers of presidential races don't gain any notoriety. Like, that doesn't up their status. They still end up in that C tier kind of, you're not really an actor I love. I don't go see things because you're in them. You're good at entertaining people, I guess. And that's kind of where Trump was. Yeah, that's what Trump was. He was a personality that people were more or less lukewarm on at any given moment. But I don't think anyone watched The Apprentice just because of Donald Trump. He was just a very good filler for that role, right? Mm-hmm. His whole shtick is that he played that, dick business dude really well, and he kind of is that guy. He may actually be that guy in real life, apparently.
Well, the benefits of editing, right?
Right, yeah. But he doesn't get in the White House. But he is kind of that guy, right? And he seems to be operating under that same persona still. He is the guy who will sit down with North Korea. He's like, yeah, why not talk? And you know what? Maybe that's the different strategy we need. It certainly hasn't been working out to not have one-on-one talks with them, right?
Yeah.
Well, you mean kicking the can down the road, as everyone has done with everything, is
right.
Not a...
Right, yeah. The political...
Like, what the fuck is going on, Kim?
Yeah, all the problems we have right now are all long-winded problems of complexity that people have boiled down and tried to move past and not deal with in a direct head-on way. Trump doesn't know how to do that, so he doesn't try. And you know what? Every once in a while, you need that palate cleanser. And it seems to keep working for him. And it will run out. That's why I think his second term, if he gets it, may be a hideous disaster. But for now...
He's doing all right.
I don't know. Every month I get my my retirement plan returns on how the investments are doing, and I'm like, go Trump, just go Trump, baby, because they keep going up. So I'm like, getting that kind of thing makes a lot of other things like sleeping with a porn star. I don't give a shit, and even and I gotta say to Bill Clinton's credit, I mean, Monica Lewinsky's actually looking better now than she did when back when he when she had the dress thing. So he was just a little bit ahead of his time.
Now, do you guys want another terrible transition?
Let's hear it.
Wouldn't expect anything less.
It looks like Great Britain couldn't put up with any more British people.
Duffer, no.
Brittany Pettibone from getting into the nation.
Pettibone.
That hurt.
Wow.
So, YouTube drama aside, Brittany Pettibone, who is a YouTuber who hangs out in similar circles to some of the people that we follow, was detained at, I think it was Heathrow Airport, where she was going to be entering into Great Britain to do a series of talks with the head of the European... Oh, what are they called? The fellow's name is Martin Sellner, and they're calling him an identitarian. I'm surprised that our Badger friend hasn't popped in for this one. But they were detained essentially because their speech would incite violence against particular ethnicities. So what do you guys take on that?
Well, clearly the white man's going to be pissed off at what's being said, so it must be them and their white fragility.
So I want to say, I definitely think the UK has every right to do this. They control who comes into their country, obviously, and they should do what they do under their law. And this is literally what we talk about when we say America is the freest country on earth. Because this would not be something we'd allow in our country, because if you can legally come there, you get freedom of speech. And this is that key difference when people start saying, well, you don't really have that many freedoms. Like the First Amendment isn't that important. Well, it is.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't like what they did, it is their right, and they can do it, and they can kind of water down their country as they want to, I suppose.
Well, the tricky bit here is that they have a lot of people who are speaking out against uncontrolled, or at least not well-controlled immigration policies and the inability to assimilate particular ethnic and cultural groups. But within their nation, they seem to allow people with these particular views, or people who are espousing these particular views, to be able to travel much more easily. The one person who is notable that they don't is Tommy Robinson. But people like Douglas Murray talk about this all the time. And I don't know if Brittany is that much more vehement than Douglas on this particular issue.
Well, that's the thing. It's not a matter of how, and this is why I think they made a terrible mistake in that the optics are going to look horrible for them in the end, because this is a pretty white girl who speaks well and publicly talks a lot to the people on the internet. And you just said she can't talk. She's the worst case scenario. Tommy Robbins at least sounds like an asshole a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So like when you're like, well, they stopped him from talking, you get a whole bunch of people kind of roll their eyes and they say, well, that's not the worst thing in the universe. Like even if they aren't okay with it, or even if they don't like the idea of it happening to them, they'll still be like, well, I'm not that guy. But Brittany, on the other hand, well, she's willing to talk to these people, goes really far out of her way to not actually say the horrible things that everyone kind of nails everyone else for. She's really good at walking that landmine. So I think that was a kind of a mistake on their part. And I understand they were trying to get the other guy more as the target, but they should have just let her go.
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, he was, apparently, from what I understood, on, some sort of, some sort of list, but she wasn't. And I understand, okay, you're traveling with him, but it's, we talk about all the time, I mean, just the optics on this. I mean, we had people here in the States when we were detaining, people who weren't even citizens, for 24 hours, and people were losing their goddamn minds.
For 2 hours while they talked to a consul.
And they were detained for 3 days.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't want them in, fine, turn them around right now. It's like, but that's
going to be what kills them more on this, is that they handled it very inappropriately and didn't get in front of any of it. So, because you're right, if they put them back on a plane and send them out of the country, I think this is a non-story, and nobody will be talking about it today.
Exactly, that's exactly it. But because you detain them for 3 days, it's just that to me is just. Yeah, I find it kind of unconscionable from a country that that some of its leaders like to lecture us on how on how we should act and what is the civil and moral way to act, and then you have this happen.
Well, let's put it into context. So I'm over on Wikipedia for Martin Sellner, and the first entry that was ever made about him was on May 14th, 2017. Within the last week, there have been 8 major updates to the profile, mostly about Brittany Pettibone. So basically, the British have just handed a right identitarian-leaning Austrian a huge amount of free press. And what'll make them look worse is Brittany Pettibone and Lauren Sutherland were both very, heavily engaged in bringing awareness to what was at the Save Europe thing, where they rented a boat essentially and went around and documented what was happening with refugees and with illegal migrants coming across the Mediterranean, and how poorly they were being treated by the groups that were taking all their money, putting them on rickety boats, and essentially letting them sink or swim trying to get to Europe. So they're really coming down on one side of this, but they're not actually acknowledging that they are not doing a good job of running PR for this particular issue, or the EU in general is having a real issue coming up with solutions to migration, to people who speak their mind who don't follow the groupthink. And it makes you wonder, it's like, what is the benefit of this? What sort of worst case scenario are they trying to push into the future that they can't deal with right now?
I think honestly they believe that if people don't say these things, that it will reduce the number of instances of violence. I think they honestly believe what they say. I don't think there's like a conspiratorial mission in all of this. They're wrong, and they don't seem to understand that the internet exists and that people who want to see quote unquote hate speech and talk about it and communicate with it are going to find a way, because we're human.
Well, see, that's the funny thing, because we know they know the internet exists because they spend more time policing what people say on the internet than
but this is
really real crime. So it's like this is going to get out. It's like, do you think that Brittany would just, I'll just go back to America and I won't say a word about this?
But no, they didn't. Yeah. They don't think. I think it's different people, obviously, that they're dealing with, and a lot of them don't. They don't all think in media savvy ways, right? So they don't understand that. Hey, this person, and this is the thing. It takes a really low information person to be all right. To be like, Brittany Pettibone needs to be controlled. She can't be allowed to speak. Because honestly, it's one of those things where, like, Richard Spencer comes to talk, let the dude talk. He torpedoes his own cause every time he gets to talk more than 30 minutes. Especially if you hand him
he's literally Hitler, so we got to punch him in the face. God.
And then people are sympathetic to it. And right now, people are going to be sympathetic towards Miss Pettibone because she spent 3 days in detention.
Well, even like you said, it's like, I mean, she, even with what she says, is not. I mean, she's not Tara McCarthy, I mean, she is not she's not, I mean, she's a likable person already, which we all know that when it comes to
virtue of not being Tara McCarthy.
Well, when people don't like your ideas, the fact that you're a likable person is very terrifying to them, because it's like, oh my God, if I actually find something redeeming in this person, does that mean I agree with their ideas? They have a problem sorting that out. But, and like you said, this guy from Austria, it's like, okay, he's all right. He's the guy. But now, because of his association with her and what has happened to her, well, congratulations. You've just made him a sympathetic figure to people who might have been in the middle, ground. And they don't.
It's really just a ton of pressure. Because that's the thing. If you hear him speak, he's a pretty sensible guy. And he's a little extreme, but he is definitely not out there talking about, rounding up people and sending them back to their country, or hating, all the darkies, and he doesn't want to get rid of the brown people, and he's not talking about eliminating democracy or free speech or any of that. Like, he's just like, we need to control immigration, and these people are doing horrible things.
The darkies. I know that's what it is, but it's just, that word just cracks me up. It's stupid, but I'm like, the darkies. I'm like, that's something that, my grandfather says, get all those darkies out of here. But continue. It just struck me funny. Well, it's funny in its ridiculousness is what it is,
I think the big problem, and this is intentional, as Lex was saying, is that the people in power treat wrong think as a communicable disease, but they also treat right think as if it wasn't a way of immunizing against it, because the position which they're taking isn't actually right. It's not actually defensible with any sort of statistical analysis. And what they're trying to sell you is that if everything looks like it's okay, it must be okay. And therefore, if you point out that things are wrong, it's you who has the problem. This is very much so I was recently reading Leanne Rimy's book, Troublemaker, and she was saying in Scientology, the term critical thinking is a bad thing because they would say that whatever you are critical of is something which you are forcing onto what you are critiquing. So it's a problem within you that needs to be fixed, not with the structure in general. And this is very much the track which the European Union, the UK are taking. But just a quick correction from Minding Freedom, the organization was called Defend Europe, not Save Europe. But what are your thoughts there, guys?
First of all, I would never use Minding Freedom as confirmation of any facts in any way, shape, or form. Let's get that right out of the way. He's a badger who posted a thing of draw me like one of your French whores. So I will not accept any information from Minding Freedom. But I mean, I've said I just think it's just, it's just, to me, it's a very worrying situation. Because, you've taken a step from Tommy Robinson, who we know, he's not afraid, like Lauren Sutherland, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty or, make himself part of the story, in my opinion. Or, even this Martin Seller. But when you start, now we've moved the line back to Brittany Pettibone. Who's next? Matt Christiansen? That's just where I worry. It's like, okay, we're starting to move the line back to, okay, now heck, at Lewis and Clark College, they called Christina Hoff Sommers a fascist. I mean,
that was rich, I thought.
It's just, it's completely, and that's just where the thing is, that's where the worrying line is. It's consistently being moved back to, well, Minding Freedom, just a blonde Führer's next. I'm like, she's top of the list. Okay, Rebecca's by far the top of the list, but that's just, to me, the worrying part. As it's just the line is going to continue to move, back to what is quote unquote offensive.
I think,
although that could be good, because then they'll start eating themselves when they make someone like like Christy Winters or Steve Shives is offensive, because of his radical views.
Yeah. No, and so this is the thing. You're talking about the wrong think being a communicable disease. And that reminded me of the CGP Grey video of how hate spreads on the internet. And anger is probably, it was word he used, and it's probably more accurate. But people get angry and they spread dissemination or really intense information really quickly. But you don't spread good news that way, right? But it's because we have this disparity in how much of it you have that you see a lot of angry, bad news about the world when actually there's only a very little bit, but it gets repeated often and often.
Yeah.
And they've like internalized that into public policy. And it's like, that's more of like a topical, like noticing thing of social media. That's not really how humans work.
Well, actually, that's the problem, is perhaps it is. So to quote Jordan Peterson, but also Jonathan Haidt, we as chemical creatures are designed to react more strongly to negative outcomes, or to possibility of negative outcomes, than we are to positive ones, because it saves us, or it has a higher chance of saving us and saving our genes to be passed on to the future. And here's where, in terms of how policy is being set and how ideology is being spread, they speak to a group, they say, you're in danger, you need to defend your group members, and if you don't, terrible things are going to happen. It's like, but what if we just talk with them? You don't talk with terrible people, right? And it's like, if you want to talk with the terrible people, then you're terrible. So everything is a thought crime, and you don't want to step out of line because you will be come down on hard. And it's also the victim complex, in that you don't want someone to come down on you hard, because then you're no longer one of the righteous people, and therefore all the problems are with you and not with the group whose expectations you can't meet.
But I think some of that comes, in the modern day especially, a lot of that comes down to self-group selection. You can pick and choose if you're going to be in that group. And that's why identitarianism scares the shit out of them, in a large part, because it's forcing people into groups, right? And it scares political figures especially when they aren't on the winning side of identity politics, in that somebody can wield that against them because they can't ideologically convince somebody to leave a group and come with them, even if they're on the fence, because they're stuck with this group that they're born into, right? And that's the differentiator that I think gets ignored a lot, is that we do have self-selection. We do decide I am conservative, or I am a traditionalist, or I am yada, yada, yada. Fill in your niche, minute, tiny political grouping. And that's how a lot of people can identify themselves, or your profession, or even just your family, the city you're from, the sports team that you're obsessed with. We have all these different types of groupings that people put themselves into in the same way. And I don't think psychologically it actually means all that much of a difference compared to which one you do. It's whatever you pick to identify into.
Well, that's the thing, though, Lex, is it does actually have a biological effect, because you train yourself to be more open to certain sources of information and more resistant to others. So the problem becomes people who have been in these groups for long periods of time, they lose the ability to perceive that they can choose other options. And it takes a lot to try and go and rescue those people. And, you know, we can kind of see it as sort of secondary evidence. There's a lot of YouTubers who said, I used to be a feminist, I used to be this, I used to be that. And it's like, well, how much information did they have to be on the receiving end of to actually make this choice not to follow the group anymore? So it's that trick of, where do you get the people and where do you convince them that you have choice versus you have a responsibility to the group? And that's tricky when information, or at least forms of information, are so easily accessible without their counterpoints being as accessible.
See, this is the thing. I've always run under the assumption, and I don't have a ton to back this up because it would be really hard to test actually, that it's less about the quantity or even quality of information, but the timing of it. Is that if you are the victim of a sexual assault, you are going to be incredibly receptive to almost any rational conclusion as to what caused someone to do that to you. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter how much of it you see. You are just going to be heavily receptive to all of that. Yeah. And this is really easily seen in a lot of other scenarios, but it's really hard to say on like a day-to-day thing. Like, you know, how do you what's that moment where somebody's like, oh, libertarianism is a good idea?
Like an aha moment?
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't get that like with long studying. I mean, you will afterwards, but you got to have that initial thought of like, hey, I might be wrong.
Now, guys, we have about 3 minutes left. What sort of closing thoughts do you guys have?
Fuck daylight savings time.
Right. God,
I'm dying over here, man. I'm like,
I literally have considered today trying to find a way. I want to run to be president, and this will be my platform is eliminating daylight savings time, and I will guarantee I would win in a fucking landslide if the election was held around this time of year. If it was held the day after daylight savings, I literally would get like 90% of all the vote, because I hate it with a passion.
The tricky thing with that there, Stan, is you could totally do it. You just have to take 15 more days out of February to do it.
You know what? To get my hour back, I would absolutely do it. Because
February always gets the shaft. Such a short month.
February does get the shaft. The other thing I mean, my closing thoughts are New York City and the San Francisco, LA area need to be just make their own state and leave the rest of our states alone. And
can we Lex Luthor them off the continent?
Exactly. It's because I just actually found out, and I want to do a video on this, that apparently New York City has been there was some thing going on with our county, and I'm sure other counties in New York, where they would ship homeless people up to our counties, essentially pay for 1 year of housing for them, and then now it's our problem. And we didn't have a choice in the matter. So my county is actually finally saying, no, we're done with this because we're done with you dumping your problems off on us. I'm actually quite proud of my county that they're fighting back. So I plan on doing a little bit of research in the video.
Awesome.
Nice. Now, Mr. Sutherland or Lex, any closing thoughts?
I already said mine. Fuck daylight savings time.
And what was that, Lex? I didn't catch what you said.
I think I've already said my piece. But the other piece of note, the same Florida legislature that passed the gun restrictions also eliminated daylight savings time in Florida. It was the same session. So maybe these are the wisest of the leaders, and maybe we should heed their call.
Or maybe they just know how to make a sandwich. You get the good thing, and you sandwich it. So you sandwich a bad thing between two good things. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. We have been the Rovertime podcast. Check us out next week. Same Rovertime, same Rover channel. Have a great week, ladies and gentlemen.
Batman references.